Welcome back to our reading through the entire Bible. Can you believe you are well more than halfway through? So stay faithful to your discipline of your reading. We come to really our session 43. That's Jeremiah 49 through Ezekiel 3. And as we come, you're going to find your reading this week. We're going to come to the end of the book of Jeremiah. And we find that his prophecies, now we're going to turn to the prophecies against those Gentile nations surrounding Judah. Remember, Babylon now is being used by God, bringing judgment against Judah, the southern kingdom. But because these other nations kind of gloated about this, now they're going to be judged, and they're going to be judged by Babylon as well. So since they're just as rebellious against God as Judah was, God's not a respecter of persons. He will deal, and he does judge nations. Now, you've read about the judgment already of Egypt and Philistia and Moab, but now the judgment's going to be, you're going to read on Ammon and Eden, Damascus, Kedar, Hazar, Elam, and finally Babylon itself is going to be judged by God by the Medo-Persian Empire. Interesting, you're going to see that it's only Egypt and Moab and Ammon and Elam are actually given any kind of promise of restoration. The others are just going to go out of existence. Now, in these closing chapters, you're going to see that Jerusalem is finally captured and destroyed and plundered. They've had two other shots. Remember Nebuchadnezzar? He had attacked them, and then he took some hostages, like Daniel as a young man, and then he pretty well left them alone. But Jehoiakim started to rebel, did an alliance with Egypt, and ticked off Nebuchadnezzar, so he comes a second time. Well, he does it again. When he comes a third time, he's ticked, and that's when the temple is destroyed and the land is basically plundered. Well, the leaders at that time are killed. You're going to read captives are taken to Babylon. Remember, they're going to be there for the 70 years. And this is all because Judah, the southern kingdom, never learned from their fellow Jews 134 years later when God used Assyria to bring judgment on the godlessness of their brothers up north. And yet, instead of learning, they just went ahead and did the same thing under the leadership of evil kings. You know, Peter in 2 Peter 3, he warns us that even though men say, well, I haven't seen the judgment of God, we tend to say that today. You know, or do we see any judgment of God over any nation or nations? You know, it's hard to say for sure, but we cannot dismiss. The fact is, we need to pray, and we need to continue to pray for our nation. Well, we now are going to enter into the book of Lamentations. The author in the book is never mentioned, but because of internal, external evidence, it's probably Jeremiah himself. These are going to be really 5 poems, 5 laments. This is before Jeremiah is taken captive to Egypt by some of his rebellious fellow Jews because they blamed him for Babylon coming because he predicted and he warned them. There's going to be 3 themes running through these 5 laments. There's going to be the theme of the mourning of the Holocaust of Jerusalem. There's going to be the confession of sin and acknowledgement that this is God's righteous judgment. And the third theme is going to be the hope of God in the future, giving restoration and comfort and encouragement to his people. Jeremiah spent 40 years warning the people of Judah, and yet he has suffered rejection and abuse by his own people. And yet, instead of this, well, I told you so, which would have been my tendency, Jeremiah, you see his compassion for his people. And so with these 5 mournful poems, you could describe them as the destruction of Jerusalem. The second one will be the anger of Jehovah. The third will be the prayer for mercy. The fourth, the siege of Jerusalem. And then finally, the prayer for restoration. And this week of reading is going to take you through all 5, the entire book of Lamentations. Then we're going to end our week reading with Ezekiel 1 through 3. And like Jeremiah, Ezekiel was a priest, but he was called to be a prophet. So Nebuchadnezzar's destroyed Jerusalem in these 3 stages that we told you about. And first one was 605 BC when he overcame Jehoiakim and he took key hostages like Daniel. And then he comes back again in 597. And this is because Jehoiakim rebels. So he submits, takes 10,000 more hostages. That includes Ezekiel the second time. And then the final one in 586 BC, well, that's when the city was destroyed because Nebuchadnezzar was really angry. Ezekiel was about 25 years old when he's taken captive. He's about 30 years of age when he gets his prophetic call. This means he was about 17 when Daniel was deported in 605 BC. Well, so all that means Ezekiel and Daniel were about the same age, and both of them about 20 years younger than Jeremiah, who's still back in Jerusalem. Well, Ezekiel needed to convince the exiles that there's still hope of restoration, but after they hear that Jerusalem had been destroyed by Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, they lose hope. So now he begins to talk to them, and he spends 22 years, and he writes this book. The first 32 chapters talks about this is God's righteous judgment, but from chapters 33 to 48, Ezekiel tries to encourage them about God's restoration and plan for them and blessings in the future. Well, then we're going to move into the first 3 chapters of Ezekiel, and put your seatbelt on and get ready for a ride, because you're going to see pictures of heaven and angels like Moses and Isaiah and Daniel and even John in the book of Revelation. First 3 chapters of Ezekiel, don't think that you're having some kind of mental breakdown. It's just fascinating. You're going to get a glimpse of heaven and the call of God of Ezekiel. Well, we'll pick this up next week when we take up the reading. God bless you and be faithful.